Some teachers have a classroom career that spans their entire professional life, while others move through the many career options available for a person with an education credential. An outstanding example of the latter path is David Chudnovsky, who has taught at each level of education during a 30-plus year career and has done so on 3 continents. David Chudnovsky's professional life has also encompassed the presidency of the BCTF and most recently service as the MLA from Vancouver, Kensington. This gives him perspective on education from the school, the federation, and the government sides of the negotiating table. From this experience, he has developed positions regarding democratic control of schools, the role of local trustees, the accountability movement, and most broadly, the overarching purposes of education. We are pleased to benefit from the observations of an exemplary teacher leader, David Chudnovsky, on Your Education Matters. David, I'd like to give our audience benefit of how careers in education form and develop. So would you, to begin with, tell us how you got into teaching and how that gradually evolved into a role as a teacher leader?
I always wanted to be a teacher from the time I was a kid. And in the early 70s, we spent a year in England, lived in London, and there was a terrible shortage of teachers, and they'd take anybody. So they took me, and I worked for a year teaching math in a school in South London, a secondary school. It was great. I enjoyed that. When we came back to Canada, I did my teacher training at the University of Toronto and taught for a couple of years in Ontario. We moved to BC in 1978, and I got a job in Surrey, teaching in a little elementary school, a little community school in Surrey for a number of years, and then on to teaching secondary the last 20 years of my career. As regards working in teacher organizations, it just seemed like the logical thing to do. I was teaching in Surrey. We had a wonderful, and have a wonderful teachers union, teachers organization, the Surrey Teachers Association. It seemed like the place where I could make a contribution, I could do some service for my colleagues, and I got to know what was going on. If you're working in the teachers organization, you hear what's happening in education before anybody else does, almost, and I guess I wanted to know what was happening.
Very interesting. And unlike some persons, you didn't choose to go the vice principal, principal, superintendent route. What contributed to the choice not to go that way in the evolution of your career?
Well, I was a teacher and I loved teaching, and I could be a union activist, an activist in the Surrey Teachers Association and the BC Teachers Federation, and still be a teacher. And that was perfect for, as far as I was concerned. I was learning over many years to be a better and better teacher. I was enjoying myself finding areas and courses that I liked to teach, and developing materials and interacting with kids and learning from them. So I didn't want to stop doing that. I thought then, and I think now, that the most important job in the education system is the classroom teacher, and I enjoyed it. So I was able to do both roles. I thought they were both important, and so it was a natural thing for me to stick with teaching, and I'm glad I did.
It's kind of a hard choice, isn't it? Because oftentimes, if you want to affect education at a broader level, you have to leave the classroom, and as you're pointing out, for many people, most people who get involved in teaching and stay for more than a couple of years, they feel a real commitment to the classroom. On the other hand, in our system, the way it has evolved, we need to have organizations of teachers as well as principals and school trustees, and I'd like you to talk some about why we need things like a teachers' federation and what role a teachers' federation plays in the balance of evolution of education policy.
There's a perspective, or maybe I should say a series of perspectives that come from the roles that we play in the community. If you're a carpenter, there are experiences that you have and needs that you have and professional issues that come up that are unique to the fact that you're a carpenter and you're playing that role. It's the same with teachers. There are experiences that people have that and goals that they have in common that arise because you're a teacher. So, for instance, you want teachers to be thought well of in the community. That's something that the BC Teachers Federation has seen as one of its goals over its 90-some years of existence, to raise the level of understanding and of sympathy for the role of teacher in the community. You want materials and resources and training and all of the things that make it possible for you as a teacher to do a good job, and that's common. That's a common thing. So it's the most natural thing in the world for teachers to get together, just like every other profession or craft, and come together and advocate for and seek those things that are common to their interest. So it seems to me that's one important piece of the puzzle when it comes to having organizations like the BC Teachers Federation. Another one is that as public service workers, there's a relationship with government, whether it's local governments, school trustees, or the provincial government, the Ministry of Education. There's interaction around issues like salaries, curriculum, training, materials, pensions. There's all kinds of things that, again, that they're common to teachers' experience and that they want an organizational form to pursue.
I see. And yet, and not only in Canada, but certainly also in the United States, teachers' unions are often demonized, put up as being the problem. There's a good deal of effort put into creating a negative view of teachers' unions, teachers' federations, organizations. And I'm wondering why that argument is so often made and why it's accepted maybe more often than it should be by the general public. For example, in BC, you often see that the BCTF's accused of being self-interested in the arguments it poses, and that it opposes accountability, for example, because teachers do not want to be held accountable for inadequacies in their performance. Why do you think this kind of view is held? It isn't so held, for example, about physicians or dentists or physical therapists and many other professions.
I guess there's two things that I'd say about this notion that somehow the BC Teachers Federation is self-interested. The first thing is it is. Every organization is interested in its members and advocates for the interests of its members. So let's take some examples. The BC Business Council. They take the position that taxes for corporations and wealthy people should be reduced and there should be more privatization of public services. Why do they do that? Because of self-interest. They're operating in the interest of their members. The BC Liberal Party, Mr. Campbell's government, they have over the last number of years reduced taxes for wealthy people and corporations in BC by hundreds of millions of dollars. And at the same time we have 15,000 people in the province who are homeless, have nowhere to live, and for the 6th year in a row we have the highest child poverty in the country. Why do they reduce taxes for wealthy people when that's going on? Self-interest. It's that they're self-interested. They work in the interests of the people who are their members and their supporters. The same thing that the BC Teachers Federation does. We have for forever tried to make sure that teachers are reasonably paid. Nobody ever got rich going into teaching, and nobody ever went into teaching to get rich, but there is self-interest there. But there's a second, so it's the same as every other organization. There's a second thing that needs to be said about the BCTF that people aren't nearly as aware of, which is that there's a whole range of activities that the Federation carries on, which couldn't be described as self-interested at all. So, for instance, the BCTF has 31 what are called provincial specialist associations, curriculum organizations inside the BCTF, nothing to do with salaries or working or pensions or benefits, having to do with helping teachers be better teachers. I, for my entire career, was a member of the BC Teachers of English Language Arts. That organization puts out a journal that helps teachers do their job better. They hold workshops that I attended for years and years and years, conferences. And I was a much better teacher for having experienced what the Federation, the BCTF, was able to provide for me. The Federation's also involved in social justice work. They do a tremendous amount of work on anti-racism, on dealing with homophobia, on dealing with poverty in schools. And we do work with teachers and students in other countries. So there's a broad range of activities that the BCTF carries on, which could never be called self-interested, but they somehow aren't as interesting to the press and the media. They should be, but they aren't as interesting to the press and the media.
Last time I checked, the budget for those social justice activities was $1 million a year out of teachers' dues.
Absolutely, and what people often don't know is that those professional activities that I talked about, curriculum activities, helping teachers be better teachers, as many people work at the BCTF offices, work on those areas as work on areas of bargaining and contracts. So it's a major preoccupation of the BCTF. I know the teachers across the province are proud of it, and we're all better for it. Teachers are better for it, and kids are better for it.
Well, let's jump now to something that's relatively unusual, which was that you were not only president of the BCTF at a point, but you became an MLA recently. And tell us a little bit about how things looked from that vantage point on education policy making.
Well, it was education policy making that convinced me, that motivated me to do it in the first place. I happen to have been the president of the BC Teachers Federation. Wonderful job. I was very pleased to do it. During the worst days, the winter of 2001-2002, when the Campbell government brought in a whole series of laws that really made things worse for kids in schools. They took protections for kids, the services that kids receive in schools, protections like limits on class sizes, guarantees of services to students with special needs. They took those out of the collective agreement that teachers had negotiated with school boards across the province, and they did something even worse than that. They made it illegal in British Columbia for teachers, organizations to sit down with their employer and negotiate learning conditions for kids in schools. So it's illegal in British Columbia. People don't know this. It's illegal in British Columbia for teachers and their organizations to sit down with school trustees or the provincial bargaining agent for school trustees and negotiate better learning conditions for kids in schools. That was very upsetting, and as the spokesperson for BCTF at the time for teachers across the province, I said the result was going to be larger class sizes, less services to kids with special needs, and the closure of schools across the province. That happened. And as a result of that, and the terrible frustration that I and thousands of teachers and tens of thousands of parents and communities across the province felt, I was convinced that maybe I should put my money where my mouth is and go into the legislature. And I was fortunate enough in 2005 to have been elected by the people of Vancouver, Kensington, my neighborhood, to represent them in the legislature.
Well, when we come back, we'll talk some more about your experience in the legislature. We'll be back in just a second.
For more than 40 years, the Faculty of Education at SFU has been delivering academic programs that are innovative and responsive. Based on the academic research of our professors and the expertise of practicing teachers from your communities, our programs are designed to meet classroom needs. As a community, we're piecing together a successful education experience for students today and in the future.
We're visiting today with David Chudnovsky. David, you were helping us understand what things look like as an MLA as opposed to teacher leader, president of the BCTF. And so I'd like you to help us understand how policy evolves in British Columbia in the area of education and what you'd recommend as possible ways to improve the way we create our education policy.
Unfortunately, in British Columbia, almost all public policy is made in the Premier's office, and that's not the way it should work. We have an increasingly presidential kind of system in BC, and I think that Mr. Campbell's time as Premier has escalated that, and that's unfortunate. How should education policy be made? It seems to me that education policy should be the result of an engagement, of a discussion, of a debate with a number of groups and individuals participating in that. So first of all, parents. Parents want to be involved in their kids' education, and we need to find ways. And parents find those ways. They form advocacy groups and lobbying organizations. But parents and communities need to be part of the discussion. School trustees, who are closest, who are the elected people who are closest to the situation, to the school, need to be involved in that discussion. Teachers, as the practitioners, as the people who are doing the work in the schools, need to be involved in that discussion. Academics, people who do research, to help us to understand what works and what doesn't work, what's the history been, need to be part of that discussion. And policymakers at the provincial level have to be part of that discussion. So, for example, about 20 years ago, we had the beginning of a really important change in our schools, and it was in including, we call it inclusion. Students with special needs, all kinds of special needs, physical needs, emotional needs, behavioral needs, academic and intellectual needs. Students with special needs increasingly over the last couple of decades have been integrated into the regular school program as much as possible. That's a fantastic thing. It changes the way we look at schools, at the way we understand children, and at the way we operate in our community. Now, why did that happen, and how did that happen? It happened because all those groups I was talking about before, over time, came to understand that, that the way things were when we were in school, I remember in the 50s and 60s when I was in school, there was a classroom in the basement, in the corner of the school where you never went because it was kind of a scary, frightening place where the special kids were educated. And that wasn't good for I mean, people did good work there and those kids learned, but that wasn't the optimum situation for those kids, nor was it the optimum situation for us, the other kids. We needed to have a community in the school that reflected the reality of our broader society. And so that engagement, that discussion, that debate took place. And policymakers, in the end, after all of that input, put together a policy that means that those kids are included in the regular life of the school. Now, there are problems with that. It's not perfect. The resources have been reduced over the last number of years, and that's a big problem. If we're going to do inclusion, we have to do it correctly. We can't just dump kids in classrooms. But the concept, the policy change, the policy orientation came from an engagement of the broadest possible sort in the community.
They've had some success with that lately in Ontario. They have what they call an education roundtable that's brought together stakeholders, and they've gotten past some of the log jams on accountability and created a system evidently that everybody can buy into, and they're working their way through their disagreements. Now, we had, in the wake of the job action in 2005, the creation of a learning roundtable, which had ostensibly similar goals, but it doesn't seem to have played out in a similar fashion here in BC.
I think you're right, and I think that has to do with kind of bias or prejudice that the current government seems to have when it comes to public education, and in particular when it comes to speaking with and engaging with and debating with the representative teachers in the province of BC Teachers Federation. And so that job action in 2005 was an important moment in our history. Teachers and parents and communities said in no uncertain terms to the provincial government, what they predicted came true. The services for kids have been reduced. Class sizes are bigger. Services to kids with special needs have been reduced. Schools have been closed all over the province. You're not taking this seriously. And somebody stood up to the government, looked at them dead in the eye, and for the first time, the Campbell government blinked. And one would have hoped that arising from that, there would be structures with some integrity that would speak to the consensus that existed in the province at that moment in 2005. Teachers, parents, communities said things have got to change. And finally, the Campbell government, after having denied for years that there wasn't any problem, there's no problem, people are making it up, they finally said, yeah, there's a problem, we have to discuss it. One would have hoped that they would have created a forum, the round table, where you could actually talk about those things and that there would be some action and some changes that would arise from that forum. Unfortunately, it really hasn't happened. Bill 33 that was implemented as a result of the job action that teachers took and the tremendous support that they had across the province from communities and parents, it hasn't meant very much. There have been some small improvements as a result of Bill 33, but there are some big holes in that legislation. So you need partners. You need people who are serious about engaging one another with respect and with integrity. And I'm afraid that that we haven't seen that from the government yet. Hope springs eternal. I think that teachers and parents and communities again this year are facing a tremendous crisis when it comes to the funding of schools across the province. They've been pushing the government. The government backed up a little bit over the last few weeks. We'll see if they're prepared to do more.
As an observer here after many years in the United States, it's frustrating for me to see that things often seem ossified and we don't make much progress on working our way through these problems, and unfortunately it has to come to things like strikes in order for people to get in the same room and begin to talk about what's going on. That's why I'm impressed with what's happened in Ontario, where unlike here, they did allow the academic community into the round table, and I think people like Ben Levin have made a significant contribution to finding common ground for everyone to work their way through. Now, one of the particular issues that everyone knows is a sore point in this controversy is accountability in the way that it's done. And I know that at this phase of your career, where you are not holding official office but are pursuing your own interests, you have a particularly strong interest in school assessment and accountability and evaluation, all these things. And more than an interest, you're taking action along these lines. So I'd like you to talk for us now, based on these many experiences that you've had at the different levels of education, how you are applying that experience to the quest for a better school assessment system for us in British Columbia.
It comes from, again, some frustration. The people who know anything about education, people who are serious about education, know that the direction that assessment has taken over the last 10 or 15 years is really dangerous. It's really not, first of all, it's not helpful, and second, in some ways, it's very dangerous. This drive to standardization, I don't call it the accountability agenda, I call it the standardization agenda. This drive to more and more high-stakes standardized tests has all kinds of downsides to it that people who are concerned about education are very aware of. They measure a tiny corner of what's important to kids and to parents and to communities. We can get into the critique. I know that you've talked about it before on your show. But I try to think about a mom. Mom says, how's our school doing? How's our school doing? And we educators often answer by saying, well, the Fraser Institute, they're not any good at all. And their so-called report cards of schools is really a sham and a fraud. And standardized testing doesn't tell us very much about how our school is doing. We're right, of course. We're right. And anybody who takes education seriously and knows much about standardized testing and the way the Fraser Institute manipulates the results of that standardized testing, there's a consensus among educators that stuff isn't any good. But we haven't answered her question, have we? That mom asked, how's our school doing? And it's a completely legitimate question. She's right to ask the question. And so we've started a project, we call it the Great Schools Project, where we brought together teachers, unionists, administrators, parents, education activists, academics, international people. And we've begun to talk about how do we answer that mom's question in a way that doesn't hurt kids, marginalized, and kids and communities are further marginalized by the standardization agenda. Schools are commodified. They're made into products that people purchase in the marketplace by that standardization agenda. We don't want either of those things. What we want is to make schools better for kids. So we've begun a discussion. It's a complicated discussion, but it's a really exciting discussion among people who are involved and interested in education about how we can answer that mom's question. How's our school doing? How can we answer that in a way that strengthens the program for kids, that strengthens public education, that doesn't further marginalize already marginalized communities and kids, that doesn't further commodify schools, but that helps us to do better for kids. We're real excited about the project, and we'll be working on it, I expect, for the coming years.
Well, we'll be looking forward to seeing what evolves. Thank you very much for visiting with us today, David. We'll be back in just a moment. Educators have an unusual position in society. Unlike many roles, teaching is characterized by the promulgation of values. We say education is normative, by which we mean that it inevitably propagates values by what is taught, how it is taught, and by what is not selected as part of the curriculum. Values are subjective and wide-ranging, and teachers are called upon to develop a balance between the conventions of society and their own reformist consciences. Particularly among those who rise to leadership among teachers' organizations, we find individuals who are deeply reflective about the norms and direction of society. Listening to them is well worth our time and effort, for they bring an alternative voice to our discussions of society. For example, they are not speaking from a market viewpoint, and they are in touch with the emerging ways of our youth. Such educators give us a window on our moral development as a society and our likely future. We welcome their voices on Your Education Matters.